So we've been moving through the book of 1 Timothy together, and between our church services and these thoughts for the day, I've tried to touch on most of the major points that come out of that letter. And today's no different, only I found today's verses a little tricky. So of course, I did what every good minister does when they find a passage of scripture tricky. I turned to Facebook. I asked a group of over 400 Baptist ministers how they would handle these verses, how they would present them to the church. And the most common answer I got back from them was that I should ask someone else to do it. But it's a bit late for that. Here we are. Let me read to you the verses in question. Paul writes, "The elders who direct the affairs of the church well are worthy of double honour, especially those whose work is preaching and teaching. For Scripture says, 'Do not muzzle an ox while it is treading out the grain, and the worker deserves his wages.'" And the letter goes on to talk about how we should protect our leaders from false accusations. And the reason I'm finding these verses tricky is because I don't want to sit here and demand double honour as the minister of the church, the one who does most of the preaching and teaching. I'm not sure I need double honour. I'm not sure I deserve it any more than anyone else. And yet these verses remain. So I thought instead of me telling you about them, I thought maybe I'd read to you instead a few of the comments I received from those Baptist ministers on Facebook. Here's what they had to say about how they would deal with these verses. "I note that a church leader should not be a lover of money, and so I talk about it in the sense of what it says to the value the church places on its preaching ministry. I would love to see church employees paid at a rate that reflects a generous and kindly attitude, even if that means some churches cannot afford a minister. In true kingdom living, no minister or anyone else come to that, should live month by month in fear of their ability to provide for their dependents. But having more than we reasonably need might be excessive." My instinct is that Paul was trying to encourage the church not to take those who serve them for granted and honour them in the holistic sense of the word. This would include ensuring they're not financially burdened. But taking double literally, especially concerning finances, does seem to contradict the service identity of ministry. I find there are plenty more verses that encourage meekness, self-sacrifice, and humility. I think the double thing is probably a reflection of 1 Samuel 1, where Elkanah gave Hannah a double portion out of his love for her. I suspect Paul was pointing out that the share given to leaders should be a reflection of generosity and love, not budget allocation, government policy, or anything like that. The truth is that some churches treat their ministers, their leaders, really badly. In fact, both their ministers and volunteers on their leadership teams. Some churches try and run things like an unscrupulous business might, getting the greatest possible return from the least possible expenditure. In terms of pay, in terms of support, in terms of love for their leaders. They try and get the most from giving the least. I'm really pleased to say that our church, the Potters Bar Baptist Church, is not one of those. I think that the message that we should all take from these verses, if nothing else, is that our church leaders, ministers, volunteers, group leaders, leadership team, they're not like assets in a business. It's not about trying to get the most out of them. It should be a relationship between the church and its leaders of honour, of love, of generosity. And my suspicion is that if we treat all of our leaders with honour, love and generosity, we will find that they are much more effective for it.